My grandfather always said that land tells stories if you listen carefully enough. The 40 acres of the Thompson family ranch had been telling stories for 3 generations before it became mine. The property had been in our family since 1947, when my grandfather returned from World War II and used his savings to purchase what was then considered remote countryside. He built the farmhouse with his own hands, raised cattle in the south pasture, and planted the row of oak trees that now tower over the long gravel driveway. I never expected to inherit the ranch. My career had taken me to the city, working in marketing for a tech company. My visits to Grandpa and Grandma became less frequent as life got busier. I would call on holidays and promise to visit soon, but soon never seemed to come quickly enough. Then, 6 months ago, I received the call that both my grandparents had passed within weeks of each other. The lawyer handling their estate informed me that I was the sole heir to the Thompson family ranch. The first time I drove up that oak-lined driveway as the owner, something shifted inside me. My grandfather's rocking chair still sat on the covered porch. The barn still smelled of hay and leather. The windmill still creaked in the breeze. This was not just property. This was my heritage, my sanctuary. I made the decision that day to leave my city job and move into the farmhouse permanently. What I did not realize at the time was how much the surrounding area had changed. When my grandparents first bought this land, it was surrounded by other farms and open countryside. Now, modern housing developments pressed in from 3 sides. The Willowbrook Estates had been built 5 years ago, bringing with it manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and strict community guidelines enforced by the Willowbrook Homeowners Association. My grandfather had told me stories about fighting against being incorporated into the HOA when the development was first planned. He had won some concessions due to the historical nature of the ranch and its agricultural designation. But now that he was gone, I noticed the HOA seemed to be testing those boundaries. The first time I saw her was 3 weeks after I moved in. I was mending the fence along the north pasture when a luxury SUV slowed to a crawl along the road. A woman with perfectly highlighted blonde hair and oversized designer sunglasses peered out at the property. She did not wave when I nodded in her direction. She simply studied the ranch like someone appraising an item at auction. 2 days later, the same woman parked her vehicle near my mailbox and walked the perimeter of my front fence line. She took photos with her smartphone and made notes on a small pad. When I approached to introduce myself, she quickly returned to her vehicle and drove away. I thought it strange but dismissed it as curiosity about the new neighbor. I did not yet know her name, but I would soon come to recognize her as Corinne Wilkins, HOA board president and the woman who would try to take everything from me. The first official contact came in the form of a letter. The envelope appeared formal and important with the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association logo embossed in the corner. I opened it while standing beside my mailbox, the spring sun warm on my shoulders. The contents were less warm. The letter detailed 3 alleged violations: fence in need of repainting, excessive agricultural equipment visible from the road, and improper waste management related to my small herd of cattle. The letter concluded with a warning about potential fines and a requirement to address these issues within 14 days. What struck me as odd was that none of these things had changed since my grandparents owned the property. The fence had been the same cream color for decades. The tractor and plow had always been stored beside the barn. The cattle waste management system had been approved by the county years ago. I spent that afternoon reviewing the documents my grandfather had kept regarding the ranch's relationship with the surrounding development. His meticulous record-keeping revealed that the ranch had been granted specific exemptions from certain HOA regulations due to its historical status and agricultural zoning. I felt reassured but still uneasy. 3 days later, the doorbell rang. When I opened the front door, I found myself face to face with the blonde woman from the SUV. Up close, I could see her expertly applied makeup and the diamond tennis bracelet that caught the sunlight. Her smile was practiced but did not reach her eyes. "Hello there. I am Corinne Wilkins, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I wanted to welcome you personally to the neighborhood." I introduced myself, explaining that I had inherited the ranch from my grandparents. Yes, the Thompsons. I knew them slightly. Such a shame about their passing. Corinne's eyes drifted past me to survey the interior of the house. "I assume you received our courtesy notice about some compliance issues." I did receive a letter, but my understanding is that this property has certain exemptions from HOA regulations due to its historical status. Corinne's smile tightened. Historical status or not, we all have to maintain certain standards. This development has property values to protect. Your ranch stands out quite dramatically from the rest of our community aesthetic. Without invitation, Corinne stepped past me onto the porch and gestured toward the property. "Just look at that old barn. The paint is peeling. And that ancient tractor out there, it looks like something from a museum. Not exactly what prospective buyers want to see when they are considering investing in a home here." I felt my patience wearing thin. "With all due respect, Ms. Wilkins, this is a working ranch. It has been here long before Willowbrook Estates existed." Perhaps that was appropriate then, but times change, areas evolve. Corinne ran her finger along the porch railing, checking for dust. "My son Bradley is actually looking for property in this area. He has some wonderful ideas for modernization. The location is perfect." I crossed my arms. "I have no plans to sell. This ranch is my family legacy." "Everyone has a price, dear." Corinne reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a business card. "When you are ready to discuss options, give me a call. Bradley's development company has transformed many outdated properties like this one. They could make you a very fair offer." She handed me her card. "Corinne Wilkins, Realtor, HOA Board President," with a phone number embossed in gold lettering. "I will not be calling," I said firmly. "And regarding those alleged violations, I will be reviewing the exemption documentation with the HOA board." "Of course, review away." Corinne smiled as she walked back to her vehicle. "But just between us, those exemptions were very specific to your grandparents. New ownership might change things considerably." As her SUV pulled away, I stood on the porch, her business card crumpled in my fist. The implication was clear. Corinne wanted my property, and she intended to use her HOA position to get it. What had begun as subtle interest had just become an overt threat. I did not know then how far she would go, but I was beginning to understand that this woman saw my family legacy as nothing more than a development opportunity for her son. Over the next 3 weeks, my mailbox became a source of dread. Every few days, a new HOA violation notice would appear, each more ridiculous than the last. The cattle made excessive noise during quiet hours. The height of the grass near the fence line exceeded the maximum allowable length. The historical weather vane on top of the barn was an unauthorized ornamental fixture. The notices piled up on my kitchen counter, each carrying threats of increasing fines. I addressed each violation methodically, sending registered response letters citing the specific exemptions that applied to my property. When I called the HOA office to discuss the situation, I discovered that Corinne personally handled all special cases and that she was conveniently unavailable whenever I called. My first real insight into what was happening came from my neighbor to the east, Martha Jenkins. Martha lived in the last house in the Willowbrook development that bordered my property. She appeared at my door one evening with a homemade apple pie and concerned eyes. "I thought you should know what Corinne has been saying at her dinner parties," Martha said as we sat at my kitchen table. "She has been telling everyone that this ranch will be converted into luxury homes by the end of the year. She claims her son Bradley already has architectural plans drawn up." I nearly choked on my coffee. "That is absolutely false. I have no intention of selling." Martha nodded sympathetically. "I figured as much. But Corinne has been showing people concept drawings. Beautiful homes with 3-car garages and community stables where your barn stands now. She calls it the Estates at Thompson Ranch and claims it will increase property values by 30%. She cannot do that. This is my property." "Corinne has ways of getting what she wants," Martha warned. "When the Gundersons wanted to paint their house a slightly different shade of beige last year, she blocked them with regulations until they gave up. The Millers wanted to install solar panels, and she found some obscure bylaw about roof aesthetics. She always finds a way." After Martha left, I drove around the neighborhood with new awareness. I noticed homes with peeling paint similar to my barn, ornamental fixtures more unusual than my weather vane, and grass certainly longer than mine. Yet none of these properties had violation notices posted. Corinne was targeting me specifically. The following week, I attended my first HOA meeting, held in the community center near the neighborhood entrance. I arrived early, signed up for the public comment period, and took a seat in the back row. Corinne presided over the meeting with parliamentary precision, moving efficiently through the agenda items. When it came time for public comments, she called every name on the list except mine. "Excuse me," I said, standing as the meeting was about to adjourn. "I signed up to speak." Corinne glanced at her list with exaggerated confusion. "I do not see your name here, and unfortunately, we have run out of time for tonight. You can submit comments in writing to the board secretary." "This is urgent. It concerns multiple violation notices that have been issued against my property despite standing exemptions." "All violation appeals must follow proper procedure," Corinne stated flatly. "As outlined in Section 4.3 of the HOA bylaws, appeals must be submitted in writing 15 days before being addressed at a meeting. The board cannot make exceptions." As the meeting dispersed, I approached Corinne directly, but she was suddenly surrounded by board members. I noticed her speaking intently with a tall, clean-cut man in an expensive suit. When he turned, I caught a glimpse of his face, the same square jaw and cold eyes as Corinne. This had to be Bradley, her son. The next morning, I installed security cameras at key points around my property. That afternoon, they captured Bradley driving slowly past the ranch in a black luxury sedan. He stopped twice to take pictures with a professional camera equipped with a telephoto lens. He spent particular time photographing the southern pasture, the flat, easily developable portion of my land. 2 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA lawyer stating that my continued noncompliance with HOA regulations had resulted in daily fines now totaling over $3,000. The letter mentioned that liens could be placed on my property if the fines remained unpaid, and that further enforcement actions were being considered. That night, I sat on my grandfather's porch rocker watching the sunset paint the sky above my land. The weight of what was happening settled heavily on my shoulders. This was no longer about petty regulations or neighborhood aesthetics. Corinne and her son were orchestrating a systematic campaign to force me out. They wanted my land, and they were using the HOA as their weapon. As darkness fell, I noticed a car parked on the road near my property line. Through the gathering dusk, I could make out two figures inside, looking toward my house. I raised my hand in acknowledgement, and the car immediately pulled away, headlights flashing across my front porch as it departed. The message was clear: I was being watched. They were waiting for me to break. But they had underestimated what this ranch meant to me, and they had certainly underestimated how far I would go to protect it. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. The delivery required my signature, and the courier waited patiently as I examined the thick envelope bearing the letterhead of Davidson, Wheeler and Associates, attorneys at law. Inside was a 6-page document filled with legal terminology, but the essence was clear enough. The Willowbrook Estates HOA was initiating formal legal proceedings against me for persistent and willful violations of community covenants. The letter claimed that my property was subject to the full extent of HOA regulations, despite any previous arrangements, and that my grandfather's exemptions had been conditional accommodations that did not transfer with the property. It demanded compliance with all outstanding violations within 30 days, or the HOA would pursue all available legal remedies including, but not limited to, injunctive relief, monetary damages, and enforcement of liens that may result in foreclosure proceedings. The final paragraph was the most alarming. It stated that the HOA had received interest from qualified buyers prepared to bring the property into full compliance, and suggested that a voluntary sale would avoid unnecessary legal complications and expenses. The threat was thinly veiled but unmistakable: sell willingly, or we will take your property through legal means. I placed the letter on my kitchen table and tried to control my shaking hands. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. This was a calculated legal attack designed to force me off my land. I needed help, and I needed it quickly. That evening, I began researching everything I could find about Bradley Wilkins and his business dealings. Public records showed that he operated Wilkins Development Group, specializing in luxury residential community planning. Their website featured photos of converted farmland, transformed into sprawling developments with names like Heritage Estates and Meadowview Heights, all featuring large homes on small lots with high price tags. A Business News article from 2 years earlier described how Wilkins Development had successfully acquired and transformed an old family farm into Orchard Grove, a high-end gated community. Reading between the lines, I wondered how successful that acquisition had been for the original farm owners. The next morning, I called James Harmon, a local attorney my grandfather had mentioned in his papers. His office was in a converted Victorian house downtown, with creaking hardwood floors and bookshelves filled with legal volumes. James himself was in his 60s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle manner that belied his reputation as a fierce advocate. "So Corinne Wilkins is after your property," he said after reviewing the legal letter and my grandfather's documentation. "I cannot say I am surprised. Her son has been buying up properties all around the county." "Can they really force me to sell through HOA violations?" I asked. James removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "It is complicated. Your grandfather did secure some important exemptions, but there are vulnerabilities in how they were documented. The HOA agreement does specify that certain exemptions were granted to Edward and Margaret Thompson specifically, not to the property itself." My heart sank. "So I have no protection." "I did not say that," James replied, replacing his glasses. "There are other factors in your favor. The property was designated as historical agricultural land by the county before the development existed. That designation supersedes HOA covenants in many cases. And there is the matter of selective enforcement. If they are targeting your property while ignoring similar issues elsewhere, that constitutes discriminatory enforcement. He began making notes on a legal pad. The immediate concern is responding to this letter within the time frame. We need to establish that you dispute their authority to enforce these particular regulations against your property. We also need to document any evidence of selective enforcement. As I left James's office, I felt slightly better. At least I had someone knowledgeable on my side. But when I returned home and found yet another violation notice tucked into my mailbox, this one claiming my grandfather's antique plow displayed near the driveway was an unauthorized lawn ornament, my determination hardened. That afternoon, I drove to the county record's office. The clerk, an older woman named Betty who remembered my grandfather, helped me search through the property archives. After several hours, we discovered something interesting. The HOA documents Corinne had been citing in her violation notices did not match the original agreements filed with the county. The originals clearly stated that agricultural exemptions applied to the Thompson property and successors, not just to my grandparents personally. "Someone has been playing fast and loose with the paperwork," Betty remarked, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "These documents have been altered from what was originally filed." Armed with copies of the original documents, I returned home and headed straight for the attic. My grandfather had mentioned a special box of important papers he kept there. After an hour of searching through dust-covered containers, I found a metal lockbox with my name taped to the top. Inside were the original deeds, tax documents, and most importantly, a notarized agreement between my grandfather and the original developers of Willowbrook Estates. The agreement explicitly stated that the Thompson family ranch would retain its agricultural status and exemptions from aesthetic regulations in perpetuity, regardless of ownership changes within the Thompson family. Also in the box was a handwritten letter from my grandfather, dated just a month before he passed away. "I always knew someone would try to take this land once I was gone," he wrote. "This box contains the ammunition you will need to fight them. This ranch is your birthright. Do not let anyone take it from you." I sat cross-legged on the attic floor, surrounded by the documentation of my family's foresight, as tears streamed down my face. My grandfather had anticipated this battle and had prepared me for it even from beyond the grave. The papers around me were not just legal documents. They were my shield and my sword in the fight that was coming. For the first time since receiving the lawyer's letter, I felt a spark of hope. Corinne and her son had picked the wrong ranch to target. I had history on my side, and as it turned out, I had the actual law on my side as well. The spare bedroom became my war room. I cleared the furniture to make space for a large cork board that soon became covered with timeline charts, copies of violation notices, photographs, and sticky notes tracking every interaction with Corinne and the HOA. I installed a security camera system that covered every angle of my property and set up motion alerts on my phone. My documentation became obsessively detailed. Every phone call was recorded legal in our state with one-party consent. Every interaction was immediately transcribed into a dated log. Every piece of mail was scanned and filed both digitally and physically. If this was going to become a legal battle, I would have evidence of everything. Martha Jenkins became my eyes and ears in the community. She reported back that Corinne had begun holding neighborhood improvement meetings at her home, where she showed aerial photographs of my ranch with architectural overlays of Bradley's planned development. She was actively recruiting neighbors to file complaints about my property, promising that increased property values would benefit everyone once the ranch was properly developed. Through Martha, I connected with other homeowners who had experienced similar pressure from Corinne. The Gundersons shared documentation of how their house painting had been blocked despite falling within the approved color palette. The Millers provided copies of their denied solar panel application, which had met all county requirements but had been rejected by Corinne for aesthetic concerns. As my network of allies grew, so did my understanding of just how many neighbors silently resented Corinne's iron-fisted control of the HOA. Many were afraid to speak openly against her, but were willing to share information privately. I learned that Corinne had placed her friends in key positions on the Architectural Review Committee and had changed meeting times without proper notice when controversial issues were being discussed. The most valuable ally came unexpectedly. Robert Chen, a retired county commissioner who had served when my grandfather negotiated the original agreements, responded to my email with an invitation to meet at the local diner rather than his home. "Walls have ears in Willowbrook," his message read cryptically. Over coffee in a back booth, Robert explained the history of the development in detail. "Your grandfather was shrewd," he said, lowering his voice despite the clatter of dishes around us. "He knew development was inevitable, but he refused to sell. When the developers realized they could not buy him out, they tried to zone him out instead. That is when he came to the county for protection." Robert described how my grandfather had secured official historical agricultural designation for the ranch. That designation supersedes HOA authority in many respects. It was formally recorded with the county and the State Historical Society. Corinne knows this, which is why she is trying to claim the protections were personal rather than attached to the property. "Why would the county allow the ranch to be incorporated into the HOA at all?" I asked. "Politics," Robert sighed. "The developers were making substantial contributions to certain campaigns. Your grandfather had to compromise to get the historical designation, but he made sure the core protections were ironclad. The current county administration may have forgotten, but the documents have not." Robert agreed to provide a sworn statement about the original agreements and offered to reach out to other former officials who might support my case. As we parted, he gripped my arm firmly. "Your grandfather stood his ground when it would have been easier to sell. He did it to preserve something valuable for the future. Do not let them erase that legacy." The next day, a sleek envelope arrived by courier. Inside was a formal offer from Wilkins Development Group to purchase my property for 20% below market value. A handwritten note on Bradley Wilkins' business card read, "This offer expires in 72 hours. After that, things become more complicated for everyone involved." I photographed the offer and the note, adding them to my growing evidence file. Then I called James Harmon to update him on my progress. He sounded encouraged by the documentation I had gathered, but warned me to be careful. "They are getting desperate," he said. "This kind of veiled threat indicates they are worried about your resistance, but desperate people can be dangerous. Make sure your security system is working, and document any unusual activity around your property." That evening, I noticed a black sedan parked down the road from my driveway. Through binoculars, I could see Bradley Wilkins sitting behind the wheel, talking on his phone and occasionally looking toward my house. I positioned my phone camera on the windowsill and recorded his surveillance for 45 minutes until he finally drove away. As I reviewed the security footage from the past week, I discovered multiple instances of Corinne or Bradley driving past my property, sometimes stopping to take photographs or notes. In one unsettling clip, Corinne actually entered my property line when she thought I was away, examining the barn exterior up close before my returning vehicle scared her off. The pressure was mounting, but so was my resolve. Every document I uncovered, every ally I made, every piece of evidence I gathered strengthened my position. Corinne and Bradley had the power of money and influence on their side, but I was building something more substantial, a case founded on truth, history, and law. The battle lines were drawn, and I was preparing to fight not just for my property, but for my grandfather's legacy and my future. "They have made 3 critical mistakes," said Diana Ortiz, the specialized real estate attorney James Harmon had connected me with. We sat in her modern downtown office, surrounded by windows overlooking the city. Unlike James's cozy, traditional workspace, Diana's office spoke of precision and power, exactly what I needed now. Diana tapped her pen on the stack of documents I had provided. First, Corinne clearly used her position on the HOA board for personal gain, which violates their own bylaws. Second, the selective enforcement against your property while ignoring similar issues elsewhere constitutes discriminatory practice. And third, most damaging of all, we have evidence that HOA documents were altered after filing to remove the perpetuity clause on your exemptions. She leaned forward, her expression intense. Any one of these would be problematic for them. Together, they create a compelling case not just for dismissing their claims against you, but potentially for legal action against the HOA and Corinne personally. The plan we developed was methodical and comprehensive. Diana would prepare a formal legal response to the HOA's threats, explicitly challenging their jurisdiction over my historical agricultural property and highlighting the evidence of misconduct. Simultaneously, I would prepare to bring the issue before the entire community at the next HOA meeting. "They have been operating in the shadows," Diana advised. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Many board members may not even be aware of what Corinne has been doing. Once this becomes public knowledge, she will lose support quickly." The preparation was exhaustive. I created presentation boards with timeline charts, photographs, and document comparisons showing the alterations to the original agreements. I prepared copies of county records, the notarized perpetuity agreement, and statements from former officials. Diana's team uncovered additional evidence that Bradley's development company had purchased 3 properties in the past 2 years, using similar tactics, identifying vulnerable homeowners, and using HOA violations to pressure them into selling below market value. In each case, Corinne had been instrumental in initiating the complaints that led to the sales. 2 days before the HOA meeting, I took another strategic step. I contacted Lisa Sharma, a reporter from the local newspaper who had previously written articles about development controversies in the county. After reviewing my evidence, she agreed that this was a story of public interest. "I cannot publish anything before I get comment from the HOA board and Ms. Wilkins," Lisa explained. "But I can attend the meeting as press. My presence alone might change the dynamics." On the night of the HOA meeting, I arrived early with Martha Jenkins and several other allied neighbors. We had discreetly informed sympathetic community members about what would be revealed. The usually half-empty meeting room gradually filled until extra chairs had to be brought in. Corinne noticed the unusual attendance and appeared visibly unsettled, whispering urgently to other board members. When the meeting reached the public comment section, I approached the microphone. Corinne started to object, claiming I was not on the list, but the board secretary intervened. "She is on the list, Corinne. I added her myself when she called yesterday." I placed my presentation boards on easels and connected my laptop to the projector. "Good evening," My name is Alex Thompson, owner of Thompson Family Ranch. I am here to address serious concerns about HOA enforcement actions against my property and what appears to be a coordinated effort to force me to sell my family heritage. The room fell silent as I methodically presented my evidence. I showed the original county documents side by side with the altered versions Karen had been using. I displayed photographs of properties with similar conditions to mine that had received no violations. I revealed the documented pattern of Karen discussing my property as a future development site for her son's company, long before sending me any violation notices. This is not about community standards, I concluded. This is about using HOA authority to force the sale of a historic property for personal profit. My attorney has prepared a complete legal response challenging the HOA's jurisdiction over my property based on its historical agricultural designation. But before pursuing legal action, I wanted this community to see exactly what has been happening in their name. When I finished, the silence was deafening. Then Martha stood up. I move that the board immediately suspend all enforcement actions against the Thompson property, pending a full investigation of these allegations. Another neighbor seconded the motion. Karen's face had drained of color. When she tried to object, her voice cracked. These are baseless accusations. The Thompson property clearly violates. We have all seen the evidence, Karen, interrupted board member David Winters. These documents appear to have been altered. Did you know about this? Karen's composure cracked. That old farm is an eyesore. It is dragging down all our property values. My son has plans that would benefit everyone. Gasps and murmurs swept through the room. In her desperation, Karen had confirmed everything I had alleged. Other board members physically shifted their chairs away from her, the visual representation of her power collapsing in real time. I call for an immediate vote on the motion, said David Winters. And I further move that Karen Wilkins recuse herself from all matters concerning the Thompson property due to clear conflict of interest. The vote was unanimous among the remaining board members. Karen grabbed her purse and rushed toward the exit. As she passed me, she hissed, "This is not over. You have no idea who you are dealing with." But looking at the faces in the room, the neighbors now standing and applauding, the board members calling for an emergency executive session, the reporter taking detailed notes, I knew that it was, in fact, over. Karen's power had always depended on shadows and intimidation. Exposed to the light of community scrutiny, it had evaporated like morning dew. As the meeting adjourned in disarray, neighbors I had never spoken with approached to offer support and share their own stories of Karen's intimidation. The tide had turned definitively. I had not just defended my property, I had liberated a community. The official letter arrived exactly 3 weeks after the tumultuous HOA meeting. Unlike the threatening correspondences I had become accustomed to, this one came with a different tone entirely. The newly appointed HOA board president, David Winters, had signed the document that formally acknowledged the Thompson family ranch's historical agricultural designation and its exemption from aesthetic and usage regulations that applied to residential properties. The board wishes to extend its sincere apologies for the inappropriate enforcement actions taken against your property, the letter stated. All violation notices have been rescinded, and all associated fines have been canceled. The HOA recognizes the historical significance of your property and its special status within our community. The letter went on to explain that an internal audit had been conducted, resulting in Karen's removal from the board pending a full investigation into ethics violations and potential legal improprieties. Her son's development company had withdrawn all interest in purchasing properties within the Willowbrook community. The local newspaper ran a front-page story titled, "Historic Ranch Stands Firm Against Development Pressure," featuring a photograph of me standing proudly in front of my grandfather's barn. The article detailed Corinne's attempts to use her HOA position to force the sale of my property, and quoted several community members who had experienced similar pressure tactics. In the days that followed, neighbors I had never met stopped by to introduce themselves. Some brought homemade food or offered help with ranch maintenance. Others simply wanted to share their relief that Corinne's reign over the community had ended. Many confessed they had disliked her methods for years, but had been afraid to speak out. Martha Jenkins organized a community gathering at my ranch, a sort of celebration of both my victory and the neighborhood's liberation from Corinne's control. People brought potluck dishes and set up tables in the south pasture. Children who had never seen farm animals up close delighted in meeting my small herd of cattle. Several elderly residents shared stories of when the entire area had been farmland before the developments came. The most meaningful moment came when Robert Chen, the former county commissioner, presented me with an official historical landmark designation for the Thompson family ranch, fast-tracked through his connections at the State Historical Society. This new designation provided additional layers of protection for the property that no HOA could ever challenge. "Your grandfather would be proud," Robert told me, his eyes misting slightly. He fought to preserve this place because he believed some things should not be sacrificed for profit. You carried on that fight when it would have been easier to give in. As spring turned to summer, I began restoration projects around the ranch that I had delayed due to the HOA uncertainty. I repainted the barn its traditional red, repaired the antique windmill, and installed a proper sign at the entrance displaying Thompson Family Ranch S. 1947, along with its historical landmark status. I also opened the ranch for educational tour for local schools, teaching children about agricultural heritage and sustainable farming practices. The irony was not lost on me that my property, which Corinne had once called an eyesore, had become a community treasure that enhanced the appeal of the entire neighborhood. On crisp fall evenings, I often sit in my grandfather's rocking chair on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky above my land. Sometimes I imagine him sitting beside me, nodding in quiet approval. This ranch is more than just property to me now. It is a symbol of perseverance, of standing up against intimidation and greed, of protecting what matters most. The modern homes of Willowbrook Estates still surround my ranch on three sides, but now there is a harmony rather than conflict between old and new. My grandfather's legacy continues, not just in the land he preserved, but in the principle he defended that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the odds.